Hi there, I am Scott Lowe with ActualTech Media, and we are here live from ZertoCON 2019. I'm joined by Phil Goodwin, who is the Research Director for IDC. Phil, thank you for being here.
Very much a pleasure of mine.
So I have in front of me a draft of some research that Zerto commissioned from IDC around IT resiliency, data protection, disaster recovery. Can you tell us a little bit about the parameters of that research, who you talked to, how you talked to them, and sort of what the response period and stuff like that was?
Sure, the objective of the study was to really find out what is the state of IT resilience in the IT industry. So we surveyed 500 different organizations on a worldwide basis. About 60% of those were in North America, 20% were in EMEA, and 20% were in APJ. It was conducted with a representative sample of different industries. No individual industry had more than 15% representation. And it was of organizations that we would classify as mid-sized to large scale. So in other words, with employees of more than 1,000 people. The other interesting thing about it was when we got responses, about 40% of the respondents were from the senior executive ranks of the business units. So people like CEOs, CFOs, VPs, general managers, things like that, as well as about 40% were senior managers from IT. So we had CTOs, CIOs, VP of infrastructure, data center directors, people like that. And the remaining 20% were from operational parts of the IT organization.
Was that intentional that you went after those titles, or that's just the way it sort of
We
fell
did.
out?
We did.
Okay.
We wanted to, we really wanted a representative sample of both business and IT. And we also really wanted to see what the attitude was at a senior level within these organizations.
So what are the three big takeaways that you got from the research that you conducted? I mean, the three things that people said, here's the problem, or here's the situation right now.
You're going to hold me to three, is that right?
No, you can do as many as you want. I was just saying, we'll start with three.
We'll start with that. Really, one of the huge takeaways is the number of malicious attacks and the number of tech-related disruptions that organizations suffer. 93% of the organizations that we surveyed indicated that they had had some kind of tech-related disruption within the last 3 years. 84% reported that they'd had a malicious attack, and most reported multiple malicious attacks. And when you start to peel that onion back even more, what we found was that when you got down to the number of successful malicious attacks and those that had corrupted data, fully 56% of organizations said that they had suffered unrecoverable data within the last 3 years.
The stunning part for me when I'm looking at these charts is that 50% said they had 10 or more successful malicious attacks.
That's right. That means the bad guy got in through the door.
10 times. Or more, right? Am I reading that right?
No, you're reading that exactly right. And the other thing when you drill down into that is about 90% of those successful attacks resulted in some kind of data corruption or data loss. Doesn't mean it was unrecoverable, but it had an effect within the organization.
Yeah, and as you said, 56% unrecoverable data lost because of these attacks.
Right, and I consider that the cardinal sin of data protection.
Was there did you ask any questions that asked to quantify what kind of data quantity we're talking about here?
We didn't. So we didn't ask how much data was lost or anything.
Either.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
right.
You probably didn't expect to hear 56% in 2019.
Yeah, and interestingly, last year the number was 49%. So we've done this survey 2 years in a row. It actually got worse year over year. And that difference is statistically significant because it's outside the margin of error for the study.
So how are people, did you find out how are people getting in? What are their vectors by which they're actually successfully attacking these companies?
I think one of the most successful is phishing attacks.
Absolutely.
People just clicking on the wrong, responding to the wrong email, clicking on attachments that they shouldn't be clicking on. I think that's probably the number one cause.
And when we think about this in terms of cost, there's a whole lot of things that come in that, people hear about these stunning numbers when it comes to cleaning up after a breach. And you think, you just got to restore some data and you're done. But there's a little bit more to it than that.
That's right. The costs are certainly direct costs associated with having to recover from that. But other costs that we saw highlighted in this survey included things like permanent data loss of customers. 26% of organizations reported that they had a permanent loss of customers. 33% reported that they had a direct loss of revenue. So not just the cost of cleanup, as you were saying, Scott, but also the cost, direct cost of losing customers and losing revenue.
So you ask business leaders about the importance of data to their organization and data protection, and they rate it very high, right?
Actually, they really
actually doing data protection.
Yes, they rate data protection very high. As you said at the beginning there, we also asked them how they rated the value of data within their organization.
Yeah.
So I would have expected a relatively high number because IDC estimates that about 60% of organizations are going through a digital transformation exercise. So that's the majority, and the purpose of becoming a data-driven organization through digital transformation is to become more competitive. So I was really surprised to find out that less than 20%, it was actually 19.8%, of organizations saw a direct connection between data and the success of the organization. So it made me say, well, if you're spending money on digital transformation and you don't see value in the data, what are you spending money on?
Yeah, in fact, just for the audience's sake, it reads, my organization's business leaders believe there is a high correlation between the quality and availability of data and organizational success, less than 20%.
That's right.
Prior to that there's a moderate correlation and a small correlation, or no correlation before that. So, I was a CIO for a long time. Data was king.
It is in almost any organization.
And business leaders don't see it that way.
And that was a huge surprise. And remember, the people who are responding to this, 40% of them were business leaders and 40% were IT leaders, and only 20% said they saw or that their organization recognized the correlation.
Is there a data cut that shows between the business leaders and IT leaders what that statistic looks like?
There is. I haven't pulled that out yet,
Okay.
but I'm sure we could pull that.
Just curious, because
I
would be willing to bet the IT probably sees it differently than the other business
They
leaders.
probably do. Right.
But in general, this is still a disappointing number.
Right.
Especially as you think about how many organizations are going through digital transformation projects where are intended to improve customer outcomes. You have to have data to be able to do that.
Right. That was a real disconnect for me in understanding that dynamic.
What was Zerto's first reaction to this data?
I think they were surprised at several of the numbers. I mean, they were surprised at how much data loss there had been. I think we all were at the degree of data loss. The other things that I think were surprising to bring up here is that if you look at the number one causes of or challenges related to disaster recovery, it's really all entirely avoidable kinds of data loss problems. So things like failed backups, failed restores. There were a number of things, and you look at that and you go, these are all entirely avoidable problems.
Absolutely.
That if you had the right infrastructure, you could probably avoid nearly all of those data loss situations.
A long time ago, I worked for an organization who had fired the entire IT staff. The entire IT staff. It was a city government. They had doing backups, or so they thought.
Right.
Until the financial system died, and it wasn't recoverable.
Then it wasn't, and yes.
And it's 2019. That was a very long time ago, and
right.
It's 2019, and we're still hearing about the same kinds of problems.
That's right. In the survey, we found that the top three challenges associated with the backup and recovery, number one challenge was reliable restore. Number one.
Yeah.
And number three was reliable backup. Well, if you've got a backup solution and it's not reliable restore and it's not reliable backup,
why do you have it?
You don't have a backup solution.
No. By the way, I just want to make sure the audience is aware that the reason we're not putting graphs up on the screen right now, this report is not final. If you keep checking back at ZertoCON over the next few weeks, it will be being posted there and available for download at ZertoCON. So I can't show you the slides yet, because they're still underway.
That's right, and in fact, this data is less than 3 weeks old.
Okay, so it's still being sliced.
Yeah, this is hot off the PC.
Got it. So what's causing business disruption? That's the slide I have up right now. I mean, it looks like new technologies.
New technology is a huge one. The other areas are business disruptors. So you can think about new business models, which was cited by our respondents as of one of the causes of disruption. Certainly new technologies as well.
Right.
Trying to roll them into the data center, which can change your processes, can change the way you manage people, can be fairly profound.
Was there any question about where natural disasters fall into this?
We didn't ask that in this particular survey, so
Okay.
to the degree to which natural disasters, we really wanted to know what are the biggest disruptors, and interesting, natural disasters was not on the list that we had from the respondents.
I feel like sometimes natural disasters are used as the boogeyman for
Yes.
this sort of thing.
Yes.
When in reality, it's more human-driven issues that vastly outweigh anything a natural disaster could do. A natural disaster is going to strike and it's going to be devastating.
Yep.
But the stuff that's going to be ongoing, impactful from an ongoing basis to the business is going to be driven by human error.
Yes, I don't have statistics to back it up, but I think the majority of data threats today are really from malware, ransomware, and things like that. Certainly, human error, people making mistakes,
Right.
is a big part of that. But it vastly dwarfs technological errors, which have been largely solved with better, more reliable hardware and software, better processes. And there's always that small slice at the bottom that is from natural disasters.
How is what's been I see the slide here about the impact of cloud on the data protection budget. How
Yep.
is that actually playing out in the enterprise?
Well, I think there are a couple of ways. One thing that's really nice about the cloud is that it gives you a certain comfort in data survivability. So in the old days, we had tapes. We copied the tapes, we moved them off-site.
Right.
That could take 24 hours or whatever, during which time you could suffer some kind of data loss. Nowadays, most organizations are using cloud as that immediate off-site repository. You can get the data off-site, even if it's just a backup target. You get it off-site, and the data has a high degree of survivability. But more importantly than that, I really think that cloud has been a game changer for organizations in terms of disaster recovery, because it's fundamentally changed the economics of disaster recovery. You can get on-demand resources. You don't have to build a second data center or completely redundant infrastructure simply waiting for something bad to happen. It's also possible to leverage that secondary cloud infrastructure for other purposes, things like dev test, staging, analytics, e-discovery, things like that, where you don't have to have the data just sitting there anymore.
So if I'm reading this correctly, less than 10%, about 8.2% specifically, respondents don't use public cloud for data protection.
That's right.
Implying
Very
that
few.
91.8% are in some way using cloud as part of their data protection strategy.
That's right. Very few use it for their entire data protection strategy.
But there's some components.
But there's a component of it.
And what would that entail? Is it something as simple as we moved to Office 365 so we don't have to back up mail anymore? Or is it more in depth than that?
Could be all of the above. So it could be we've moved some of our key applications to SaaS applications like Office 365, Salesforce,
Right.
Workday, there are a number of them. But also simply being able to use the cloud for archive is another example. We're going to take data that we don't expect to use or need to access anytime soon. We'll move that off to the cloud, try and take advantage of cloud economics.
So before I ask the next set of questions, when you ran the survey, was it client blind? Was it just an IDC survey, or was it branded IDC and Zerto?
No, IDC. It is an IDC
Right.
branded item.
The reason I ask is, and you went after a panel that was not
Correct.
predisposed to Zerto.
Correct. We weren't surveying Zerto customers or anything like that. This is the general population, so to speak.
So one of the big themes from ZertoCON and some of the things that happened at ZertoCON last year that are being fully realized, that are beginning to be fully realized,
Yep.
are this conglomeration of backup and disaster recovery converging.
Yep.
And one of the questions you asked was, how likely are you to pursue a convergence of backup and DR tools and eliminate redundant tools within the next 2 years, basically?
Yep.
And 40% were highly likely, 93% were somewhat likely. So, I'm sorry, 53%. So 93% of respondents said that this is a strategy they want to pursue.
That's right.
For Zerto, I'm sure that they looked at that and went, whoa.
Right.
Because nobody
They gotta
knew this
love
was
that
Zerto running this.
Right.
Yeah, they got to like that because it shows that there's a huge market for what
Yep.
they're trying to do.
Exactly.
What are some of your further thoughts on that?
Well, I believe that we are inevitably breaking down the barriers between backup and recovery, disaster recovery, archive, high availability, and those different areas where previously we had discrete hardware and software and processes for backup, for replication, for disaster recovery, for archive, and so on. If you think about backup and recovery, it's really nothing more than a method of replicating data.
Absolutely.
And once I can replicate that data across n number of nodes, where at least one of those nodes is offsite, like in the cloud,
You solved the
and
problem.
I can seamlessly, and I can seamlessly move applications and recover them across those nodes. What's the difference between that and instant disaster recovery?
There isn't one.
I really don't think there is.
No.
And I think that's where we're moving away from the notion of backup and recovery and the notion of disaster recovery to really looking at application availability.
So I think the previous slide in your presentation really says why this is happening. The question is, what's your organization's situation with respect to the complexity of its data protection requirements, with 58% basically saying that they're going to become more complex in the coming years as they add more applications.
That's right.
And so they're looking for ways to simplify this thing.
That's right. They need ways to simplify it. And one of our forecasts is that within the next 5 years, as many applications will be deployed as have been deployed in the previous 40 years.
I believe it.
Now, the vast majority there's
proliferation of SaaS.
That's exactly right. It's all SaaS. I mean, think about your smartphone. There are literally millions of applications for your smartphone. I think we're not going to see it quite that dramatic in the data center or in the cloud environment. But you can easily imagine tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of applications being deployed in the cloud on a SaaS basis.
So I don't know if the survey got into this, but SaaS from a data protection standpoint really needs to be considered as well. Are people thinking about how they make sure that they protect their SaaS applications beyond the defaults that are provided by the SaaS provider?
Unfortunately, it tends to be an afterthought. The analogy I make, if you remember client server, a lot of business units loved the idea that they could have their own computer, and they went out and bought mini computers and they put them in the closet, and then figured out that they didn't know how to manage them. So then they called up IT and said, hey, you got to manage this system for me.
We're seeing that
I'm
now.
seeing the same thing with SaaS, where business units are contracting and subscribing to these services for all the right reasons, but they're not savvy to data protection requirements. And so what's happening is they're finding out that the defaults for the data protection within that SaaS application, which is often daily backup, 30-day retention, is simply inadequate to meet corporate governance standards. And so they're suddenly calling up the IT organization and saying, hey guys, we need to figure out how to manage and keep track of this data.
And that's a lot of the shadow IT problem we're seeing out there.
Right.
My thoughts on shadow IT, it's a little bit of an aside, are that there's a failure of governance or the CIO in a lot of ways if you've got too much of it.
They're failing to meet the needs of their users.
Yeah, and
fundamentally.
it could be a governance issue as well.
Right.
And so there's a lot of work to do there.
Yep.
I see it as an opportunity for the CIO to fix a lot of problems if he goes after it and fixes it.
Oh yeah.
But it's a hard problem to solve.
Yeah, but they have to get ahead of it.
So on this idea of converging backup and DR, I mean, when we think about convergence as a theme over time, it's always been about simplicity. I mean, we saw converged infrastructure, then hyper-converged infrastructure. We've seen it a lot in the infrastructure space, and we're seeing it happen a lot more across these big theme areas now.
That's right.
Of backup and disaster recovery. And it's really a part of a broader theme of simplicity. And again, I'm probably talking too much, but my thought here is that as we see organizations want to undertake more and bigger digital transformation projects, they must think of these things. They can't be hiring hordes of IT staff to focus on technology anymore.
That's right. What we're forecasting is that the amount of data that organizations have to deal with over the next 6 years will almost triple, up to 7.5 zettabytes of data that corporate data centers are going to have to deal with. And at the same time, staff is not increasing at that rate.
No,
for the most part, it's neither budgets. Budgets are up about 2 to 3% year over year. Staff is generally flat at best, some cases going up. But the reality is you have to find the tools in order to do the job with the same amount of people.
Do you see a lot of, again, this is not necessarily just around data protection, but are you seeing a lot of transformation in the data center, not just the cloud, but in what's happening in the data center as organizations look at, we have to really rethink how we're running our business around digital transformation efforts, is it impacting the architecture as well?
It is, and one of the areas that I think it's impacting is organizations trying to decide what is really a net value or a key part of their value chain within the IT organization. So most organizations have figured out email has absolutely nothing to do with their core value. So
Right.
offloading that to Office 365 makes a whole lot of sense. There are many other applications that probably fit that. Human resource management, sales resource management, areas like that where, you know what, that is just not a key differentiator for these organizations in a competitive market. So what I see them doing is really getting down to focusing on what are those IT activities that are differentiators between us and our competitors. Let's get rid of everything else. Let that be somebody else's problem, and we will focus on the crown jewels of the organization.
So around resilience, business resilience versus IT resilience, but do you think there's a difference anymore?
Yes, absolutely. So IT resilience is the people, process, and technology associated with keeping applications available. And that's really the crux of it. How do we, the application is a tool for, think of it as all the worker bees around the organization. They need that application to be able to do their jobs, and it's IT's job to keep it running. Business resilience is really the broader scope or the broader view of that. And the way to think of it is kind of what happens if something goes wrong. Not just how do I bring those applications back up, but let's suppose people can't get into the building because it's structurally unsound, or maybe
Right.
the first 8 floors of it are flooded from Hurricane Sandy as an example. Where are those people going to go to do their jobs? If they had desktop systems,
Good
how are
point.
they going to get to the desktop systems? How are the people who need to get to inventory going to be able to get to the inventory or the manufacturing, or on and on and on? You have to game plan all of those different scenarios, and so business resilience is very much a cooperative effort between the IT organization and the business units to say, okay, these are all the crazy things that could happen. Let's plan for them and come up with a strategy to deal with them.
One of the questions you asked was, does your organization have a business resilience team? And do you think people would interpret this as a risk management team? Or maybe they're the two sides of the same coin. And 23% said that they have such a team. That includes IT, line of business representatives, and an executive sponsor. 45% have such a team in their IT group.
Right.
So they're starting, but they're not quite where they need to be yet.
That's right. So I would consider risk management as contributors to that broader team. The 23% that you cited is really what we would characterize as an IDC best practice, where you have a team made up of business unit leaders, IT leaders, as well as senior management leaders. And that's really the place to start with respect to that kind of effort.
Looking to see if there's anything else here. Those are the big takeaways that I found. What else are some things I didn't ask that you're like, people need to know this?
Well, we ask organizations a couple of critical questions. One of them was around a self-assessment of their IT resilience maturity, and then around their business resilience maturity. And on a self-awareness basis, only 8.4% of organizations said they had a high degree, the highest level of business resilience, and 11.2% or something like that said they had the highest level of IT business resilience.
Self-assessed.
Yes, self-assessed, and in fact, almost half of organizations rated themselves below average for their maturity on business resilience. So there's a lot of organizations to the left-hand side of that resiliency curve. I guess the good news is you gotta recognize the problem before you can solve it.
Yeah.
And I think people do recognize that, and they are taking steps to solve it. But I think many organizations are kind of behind the curve.
So it's sort of backhanded good news for companies that have solutions in this space. It
Right.
is, if there's an opportunity to solve some pretty critical issues in businesses, as they've even identified it themselves.
That's right, and it's getting a lot of attention.
it's likely that those companies that said they're right on track, a lot of them probably really aren't.
Probably,
So
yeah,
it's probably
that's
even
right.
a worse number than we think.
That may be so. That may be so.
Phil, thank you so much for this discussion.
Been my pleasure,
this
Scott.
was great.
Very good.
And thanks for your insights. This is fascinating information.
Very much my pleasure.
And thank you to our audience for watching. We'll be back in just a few minutes with our final interview from ZertoCON, where we'll be interviewing Mike Adams from VMware and Rob Strachey, Senior Vice President of Product with Zerto. Hi there, I am Scott Lowe with ActualTech Media, and we are here with our marketing for VMware. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And we're back again with Rob Striche, who is the Senior Vice President of Product for Zerto.
Thanks for
and
having me.
I think this is our third time that we've gotten the chat
It
with you on
is.
camera. So we want to talk about how VMware and Zerto are powering transformation for the enterprise. Who wants to start with sort of an overview of what this actually means?
I'll take it. I'll give it a shot. Why not?
Sure.
So we've been working together for a while. VMware and Zerto have been partners since 2010. We have a capability called VMware Alliance Partners, and that allows us to integrate and basically talk shop with what we're doing, right, and bring out new solutions together. And I think it's pretty key that we work on this availability construct. And one of the big programs that we have there is something we call VIO. Which is the vSphere APIs for I/O filtering. Sounds like a long piece, but it's really key for our integration capabilities, because what we wanted to do is we wanted to have great partners like Zerto be able to tie in with our functionality very easily. So this capability we have, it's called a VIB. It's a VMware installation bundle. It takes the code that we need from Zerto, puts it into the stack, and allows us to access that. And when we do that, it basically allows us to intercept I/O that's coming from the VM, headed for the virtual disk, and do something unique with it. And in this case, replication is a use case, right? And so we do it the right way, and that gives a lot of really cool benefits for the end user.
So from Zerto's perspective, how does this look different than what just a straight up Zerto implementation, or how, does it look different at all?
Yeah, it's going to look very similar, right? And I think that what we found is that we have some unique technology that we combined with the VIO APIs. We can do some very unique things that no other company can go and do. So based on our journal-based technology that we have and using our continuous data protection and replication, we can actually do things that we think give our customers an advantage. But part of it was also making sure that there are features that are tied to this VIO construct that we want to be able to use, like secure boot, which enables customers to boot up and all the way from knowing that what they're booting is really what they're booting. I guess
Exactly.
that's
Yeah.
simplest way of
Supposed
putting
to
it.
be that way.
Yes.
It is supposed to be that way, and it helps prevent against BIOS hacks and all that good stuff.
Exactly. And I think that's a big piece of what we're looking to do, is allow our customers to utilize, as the innovation within the vSphere stack continues, because it will. We want to give them tighter integration to those features that are going to be exposed through this API. And over time, we're looking to transition to the VIO stack fully. So and our customers should see really no difference long term over that. In the near term, there's some differences in how it operates and things of that nature that will overcome in continuing releases. But it's going to be a journey. But we're excited to be on this journey with VMware and be a strong partner with them.
So in this kind of an alliance, I mean, help me understand how it works. Does this,
Sure.
does what Zerto's bringing to the table inform VMware's development efforts to a point on what they're going to be bringing into vSphere to help better integrate tools like Zerto into the platform? Now, obviously, VIO is one thing,
Right.
But do their specific needs inform some of the development framework?
I think so, because when we looked at the way we had done things before, we've always been great partners, but the way we had done things before, it didn't make as much sense in how it actually was received by the customer. And then also there were some issues around things like at a cluster level, if we didn't have this one change, it would take down the entire cluster if something happened.
That's bad.
Right, exactly. And so now with this integration point, you don't have that any longer. You have VM isolation, you have the ability to add things like encryption, and it's just done the right way. And as a result, Zerto's going to get some great benefits out of tying in with this particular framework. It's like putting, extension cord that talks the right way, right?
Right.
And that's going to be very significant for customers as we think about how the technology adds to IT resiliency.
Now, obviously, Zerto's been running on VMware for a very, very long time.
Yep.
What you said, there's some new things that people are going to be able to do, secure boot and things like that. What are some of the business-centric outcomes they'll be able to see from this integration they may not be able to see right now?
Yeah, I think, again, Zerto will continue to operate like Zerto.
Right.
So you'll Zerto your VMs from one platform to another platform, be it from vSphere to vSphere or what have you. I think what we're looking for is we also want to make sure as VIO gets added into other environments from VMware, that we are there with them and going there. So I think that longer term, it continues to increase our the places we can go. And I think that's a big piece of it.
Yeah.
If I was hearing you correctly, it almost sounds like it removes some bottlenecks for Zertos to continue to expand
Exactly.
into the vSphere market, because
Yes.
they were running into some issues at scale, at the cluster level that you're going to eliminate. There were some security issues that you couldn't turn on secure boot with Zerto, but now you can, things like that.
Yeah, and you can leverage basically by getting into this I/O filter stack. It gives Zerto a number of benefits, right? So we mentioned the secure boot. We have integration into the storage policy-based management. So that says, okay, I can select Zerto right out of the interface. We've done a lot of plug-in work before, but actually being in this policy engine for storage makes a whole lot of sense. It makes it very visible to customers. There's VM isolation. So if one VM has an issue, none of the other VMs will be affected, one of the core benefits of the platform. And then you have agnostic capability when it comes to the guest OS that you're running. So a lot of those really cool benefits. But yeah, again, security and standardization, I think, is a big thing for a lot of our customers.
Yeah. And especially in particularly in things like the U.S. federal government, which it's been one of the things that's been highly asked for.
Secure boot is important there.
Yeah, secure boot's pretty important. And so when we looked at it and we said, hey, we've been in the federal government, but if you want to go into some of these other acronymed areas, you really need to be playing with the full stack.
Yeah.
And so for us, this was definitely the right time for us to engage with VMware on this API. I think we're learning about their API. They're learning about how we operate and how we currently do things like managing across clusters and doing things between different versions and things of that nature, which we'll still bring to the table. And we'll add our value add on top of the APIs as well. So I think that what we've always been able to do, we plan to continue doing.
Right.
And at the same time, it's bringing in, and as we mature our version of use of VIO, things will become even stronger together.
And keeping on that federal theme, one of the great benefits of being in this stack now, we actually insert encryption into that stack as well. So the combination, in the federal space, encryption is becoming more and more important,
Absolutely.
if not important already.
Right.
And so this is one of the benefits. You'll have an encrypted capability, and that'll exist between the two companies.
Is this primarily a technology partnership, or is there a sales alliance here as well in some way, shape, or form?
Today it's a technology partnership.
Okay. Yeah, just curious. Is there opportunity for more in the future, you think?
I bet you we have many of the same partners, actually, that go to market,
insane.
and so you have people that sell.
Meeting in the channel and stuff like
Yes.
that.
Yeah,
for a lot of
yes.
things.
Yeah, we've always been strong, and in fact, that's where we started, right, in 2011 with the first version. It was really VMware-centric and VMware-centric partners. But we have some other great alliance partners together, like HPE, who resells Zerto as well.
Yeah.
And through our cloud providers, we actually have a heavy overlap between things like vCloud Director and Zerto. So when you start to look at those two and the integrations we have there, it's just a continuation of the technology partnership that we have. And,
Absolutely.
and that actually drives a lot of the channel strategy too.
So VIO's, available today. Is the partnership available today, or is it coming? What you're doing here. Is this something that
we're
isn't sort of-
we're actively working on it. We're planning to ship the VIO product, the VIO version, as part of our 7.5.
Okay, what's the time frame for 7.5?
It's Q3.
Q3, 2019 for those who are watching this in 2020.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, so it's something in development right now.
Yeah.
Do you have
Absolutely.
beta testers, I assume?
We will. We're about 40% of the way through that version at this point.
Got
so
it.
we should be into what we would call feature preview sometime in August.
Very good. So this is really exciting for customers. I mean, especially those that have run into some of the limitations that you mentioned,
Yes.
as well as those that have been looking for more security in their environments.
Absolutely.
So this is a great news story. It's great to be able to hear it early as well.
Absolutely.
One of the things that's really interesting is you guys are willing to talk about things early, with a lot of customers, or a lot of people aren't.
Yeah.
It's really great to hear that. Like last year, we got to hear a lot about some of the things that we're seeing come to fruition this year.
Yeah. I think a big piece of it is, and I kind of said this on stage, is that I'd rather under-promise and over-deliver. And
Yeah.
if we're going to announce something, we're going to bring it out.
Absolutely.
And, this is not a, we like to have a lot of transparency with our customers. Also, our customers are the one who drive our roadmap, and VIO made sense because our customers wanted it. And I think that we go and do things in that way, and that's how we've built the business. And we're very much, as Zeev said in his keynote yesterday, it's really about listening to the customers, which
Absolutely.
is why this event is fantastic for that.
Absolutely.
Very good. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me for our final discussion at ZertoCON.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
And thank you to our audience for watching for the last few days. All of our videos will be available on a number of channels, including YouTube, ActualTechMedia.com, and ultimately at Zerto, I believe. Not 100% positive. But thank you again for watching.